Justice Smith, Jabari for three and the win. Yeah! He got it!
What's up, everyone? It's Lashard Binkley. I am, of course, the Go Field podcast and also a staff writer, lead staff writer for the Dream Shake and also for SB Nation. Of course, you can always find me over on Twitter when it's actually working at Binkley Hoops. So make sure you check me out over there. As usual, we appreciate everybody's support. So make sure you subscribe, hit that like button because that definitely helps us in the long run. It helps more people find our content as we will continue to put our content all off season. As you see, the Rockets will keep us busy at least for another month before we kind of hit the dead period in August. And then we pick it right back up in September, end of September when training camp kicks off. And I definitely plan on being out for training camp. But today on Rockets Report, we are actually talking about the Rockets transformation. That's what this whole video is going to be about. We're going to be talking about the pros and cons of the Rockets completely remaking their roster in basically a 1 day, 2 day period. It was pretty crazy yesterday that the transaction kept coming in left and right. And I want to cover kind of the pros and cons of making such a radical transformation like the Rockets did. There was a lot of transactions. And first, with the transaction that the Rockets did do yesterday, and also I'm gonna talk about the pros and then talk about the cons because there are both for it. I know a lot of people are really, really mad and some people are really, really happy, but there are pros and cons to all the moves that the Rockets made. So let's start off with all the transactions because it was a lot of them. All right. The first transaction, of course, we all know was the Fred VanVleet deal that came down on Friday night where the Rockets finally got their number one target, which was Fred VanVleet. He was signed for a 3-year, $130 million contract. That made him the first person in this offseason to get a max deal. Fred VanVleet, of course, went from undrafted, playing in the D League, to an all-star, to a champion, now a max level player. Some reports have reported that third year is possibly a team option. I haven't seen it officially yet, so we don't know for sure. But if it is a team option, that will make a huge difference because end of the day, I was saying for the longest that 2 years I could stomach. 3 years, that's kind of pushing it. Right now it is 3 years. You can definitely go check out a video that myself and Vader had with Vivek Jacob of Raptors.com, where we broke down everything there is to know about Fred VanVleet. But just, talking about it a little bit right now, that third year does kind of concern me. But if it's a team option, I think it's kind of a no-brainer considering the Rockets. Just keep in mind, the Rockets were going to have to overpay for any player that they brought in. I don't care if it was Fred VanVleet. I don't care if they brought back Eric Gordon for some reason. Any player that they brought into this team they were going to have to overpay. I don't care if it was Emmanuel Mudiay. They were going to have to overpay because the Rockets were the worst team in the league, or at the bottom for 3 years running. Before I go into the other transaction, let me just put a little bit in perspective how bad the Rockets have been. The past 3 seasons, the Rockets had the worst 3-year stretch in their entire franchise history, not just Houston history, but franchise history. That means the Rockets were even better when they were an expansion team in San Diego for the 3 years they were there. The Rockets had a combined 59 wins in the last 3 seasons. That's pretty awful, considering that in 2017-18 team that set the franchise record won 65 games. They won more games in that 1 year than the Rockets won in the last 3 seasons. The Rockets' last 3 seasons are 3 of the worst 5 seasons they've had in their franchise history in the last 3 seasons. That's how bad the Rockets were. So the Rockets were going to, no matter what, they were going to have this huge transformation. And that's why you saw all these transactions come in. Now, the length and contract of length and money of some of these can make you kind of step back and like, okay, that may be a problem, but the Rockets had to do something. This was the worst stretch of Rockets basketball in history. And I've been watching Rockets basketball for decades. It was pretty bad. All right, well, let's continue on to the other transactions that happened. Another one, which was kind of a surprise, I guess not really surprised because the Rockets did have to clear up some space, but the Rockets basically did a salary dump. They sent out Titan Umagaruba out to Atlanta. And at first, it was a report that uh, Sharania put out about it, and he didn't really put any other details. So some people may thought, "Oh wow, it was Clint Capella." I thought it was Clint Capella. I was going to be really happy, but comes to find out, it was really just a salary dump, and they got the rights to Alpha Kaba. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. Um, Alpha Kaba, who was a basically a stash player, overseas stash player that Atlanta had. Now the Rockets have the rights to him. He's a port. And they also Rockets sent out 2 future second round picks and $1 million. So basically, it was to clear up the roster and maybe clear up a little bit of cap space, but it really wasn't too much to that deal. So pretty much 2 first round picks of the Rockets sent out as basically salary dumps. Now, you may say they didn't give them a chance, which is definitely true in some of the cases. But at the end of the day, let's be honest, with Ime's rotation, none of these guys were going to get playing time. So maybe they actually get some playing time with Atlanta, and maybe they actually be able to show what they can do, because they were never going to really get any rotational minutes with the Rockets. Let's move on to the next deal. And the next deal was the one I think got most Rockets fans kind of up in arms. It was a Dylan Brooks deal, which wasn't a surprise in itself, because we saw that Dylan Brooks for a long time was linked to the Houston Rockets. Most people thought that was going to be a 2 or 3 year deal at maybe $15, $16 million a year. Well, that's not what the deal ended up being. We found out that the deal was actually going to be 4 years for $80 million. Now, that was sent Rockets fans that were already still upset about the Fred VanVleet deal. That sent them kind of going crazy on social media yesterday. Um, the fact that he got the 4 years and the 80 million, something that nobody thought that he was going to get. I mean, after his performance against the Lakers, many thought that he wasn't even going to be in the NBA. And now he's making $20 million a year. Now, again, I heard rumors that it's a front loaded deal. Again, we haven't got the particulars on the deal yet, so I don't know that. If it is a front loaded deal, then it makes it a little bit better. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet and the pros and cons, because they're definitely part of. But just from seeing the contract right now, that 4 years is a long time. I'm not gonna lie. I'm always the type of person that's gonna look, try to look at things rationally. I'm not gonna go overboard one way or another, and I'm not gonna sit there and tell everybody, "Hey, these are the greatest deals in the world," because no, they're. I mean, the Rockets. Some of these deals are a lot longer than the Rockets wanted them to be. Let's just be honest. But they had no choice in the matter and bringing in these players. So the Dylan Brooks deal, like I said, 4 years, $80 million. The only saving grace on this, I think people need to realize, is that in a couple of years, the NBA's TV deal is expiring, so that the cap will go up significantly. Sort of like when Kevin Durant first went to the Warriors. The only reason he was able to go to the Warriors because of that new deal that the NBA got, and that the salary caps then shot up. That's the same thing that's going to happen in 2 years. The NBA deal will go away, and the NBA will get a bigger deal, just because the NBA is as popular as it's ever been, and the contracts and the salary cap will go up. So $20 million now may not be as bad as you think in a couple of years. I know this is reminding some people of the Ryan Anderson contract of 4 years, $80 million. We saw how that kind of played out, but Dylan Brooks had his struggles. Yes, he did. Dylan Brooks has shot not very good the last couple of seasons. That is definitely true. But he's also a former all defensive player. He is one of the better defensive wings in the league. Again, I'm going to go a little bit more over that in the pros and cons, but just kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about the con. So the next deal for the Rockets, like I said, the deals were coming in left and right. You couldn't even keep up, and it didn't help that Twitter was limiting how many views you could see on the worst possible day for NBA fans. But I digress, because that's a whole nother podcast that maybe somebody else wants to do. Uh, Next deal that came in was Jock Landale, and that was kind of a surprise. I don't think anybody was thinking that. Phoenix actually rescinded their qualifying offer to Jock Landale when they started making all their moves, and I don't think really many people had him on the Rockets' radar. So Jock Landale, who is now 27, I think he'll be 28 pretty soon at some point during next season, was signed for a 4 year, $32 million deal. Now, another thing to keep in mind with this deal, we do know that the first year is the only year that's guaranteed. So with the Rockets, if he doesn't work out and the Rockets want to move on, he didn't work out as a backup center, then they can move on after this year and won't have to pay him that $8 million a year over the next 3 years. So that's something to keep in mind with that. It's kind of a low risk, high reward type move. It may not move a needle for many people, but let's also remember that Jock Landale actually was playing over Aiden when the Phoenix Suns were getting knocked out of playoffs against the Denver Nuggets. So they had enough confidence in him then to actually play him over Aiden, who is their max level guy. So that's just something to keep in mind. We'll see how it plays out. He's probably going to get more minutes than he ever did with Phoenix. So we'll see how that plays out. Again, the contract is only guaranteed for 1 year. So that's something to keep in mind with this deal. So it's not really a deal that's going to really crush you at the end of the day. Then we had the next big shooter drop, and I think a lot of Rockets fans that get attached to the players, which is nothing wrong with that. That's what being a fan is. You get attached to certain players. But KJ Martin, something we have seen for a while now from different reports, from Kelly Eco, from a lot of different people, that teams were interested in KJ Martin. He was finally traded. He was traded to the LA Clippers for 2 future second round picks. Again, and keep in mind, none of this is official yet, but it's pretty much a guarantee that it's going to happen. So a lot of people were upset that the Rockets were sending out KJ Martin, who they thought should have been valued at higher than 2 second round picks. But at the end of the day, another thing to keep in mind is, yes, KJ Martin was a good player. He's gotten better every year, but he was a below level defender. He did struggle at times with his outside shooting. It actually did not improve this last season. He did at times struggle trying to get his own shot. He was a high flyer. He did play hard. That's one thing you say about KJ Martin. He played hard every single time. So you never were worrying about his effort. So he definitely was a fan favorite. I know people were upset, but at the end of the day, again, people need to remember this is Ime's team now. He's going to mold it how he wants to mold it. And players like KJ Martin was going to get squeezed out. With them bringing in Dylan Brooks, still having Tari Eason, now having Cam Whitmore, who they are very high on, KJ Martin was going to have trouble getting on the court. And not to mention that the Rockets still have Jayshawn Tate, who the front office loves. Now, whether Ime loves him or not, we'll find that out. But Jayshawn Tate is still on the roster. So KJ Martin was going to be fighting for minutes still. So I think with the way the Clippers have injuries left and right all the time, I think this is actually a good situation for KJ Martin because he will get a lot more playing time with the Clippers than he would ever get with the Rockets. Let's just be honest on that. So that was the next shoe that dropped. The Rockets try to clear up some of their log jam at the forward position, but the Rockets were not done. As you see, they continue to make moves. They traded for Patty Mills. Now, at first, we thought maybe Patty Mills was going to be a third point guard, but at least from what we're hearing now, he's probably going to be part of the Dylan Brooks deal, which is probably going to be a sign and trade. So I don't think Patty Mills is going to be here on Houston. And if you follow the Rockets long enough, you know that Patty Mills tormented the Rockets for years with the San Antonio Spurs. But at the end of the day, it doesn't look like he's actually going to be joining the Houston Rockets. It looks like he's going to be moving on to Memphis. And whether Memphis is going to keep him or not, we don't know yet. And then the last deal of the day, which was probably one of the better deals, one of the deals that actually made a lot of Rockets fans happy, was Uncle Jeff is coming back to Houston, who actually played for the Houston Rockets previously, briefly. Is coming back to the Rockets on a 1-year, $6 million deal. Let me say Jeff Green, the NBA champion, who played for the Denver Nuggets last year. Another guy that can bring a veteran presence to the team. Is a great locker room guy. Is definitely somebody can still play. When we saw a couple of plays last year where he was actually posterized a couple of players, so he can still get up there and play. Won't play a lot of minutes, but he can play small ball 5 if the Rockets do choose to go small ball 5 during games. He can also play a little bit of backup power forward, but again, I think the leadership part is something you can't quantify with any of these contracts, and that's something I'm gonna bring up in the pros section of this video. Is that Jeff Green is a veteran. He's a pros pro. He's somebody that the Rockets definitely can use in the locker room. A NBA champion, somebody that's been through the fires, that was able to play well off of 2-time MVP Nikola Jokic. So just keep that in mind. That 1 year, $6 million is an absolutely great deal for a Jeff Green, who could have, even at his age right now in his 30s, he could have went to a lot of other teams would have definitely still would have signed him. So the fact that he wants to come back to Houston, definitely is a good thing on a 1 year, $6 million deal. So that was all the transaction that we know of right now. The Rockets may still make other moves. Maybe Jay Shante still may be on the move. Who knows? But as of right now, those are the moves that the Rockets made. They also made one of the moves that actually I forgot to mention. They sent Josh Christopher out to the Memphis Grizzlies as well. So Josh Christopher, another first round guy that just for some reason couldn't just find his footing with the Rockets, was back and forth on the G League and back and forth with the Rockets. He was another one of those guys, late first round picks that just wasn't going to get playing time on this team. Even though the Rockets really don't have a lot of backup shooting guards, I think the Rockets are still more comfortable playing possibly Kevin Porter Jr. at backup shooting guard, or maybe they still go out and find somebody else to play backup shooting guard. But at this point, they just felt the need that Josh Christopher just wasn't going to get minutes with the Rockets. So again, that's another reason why they moved on from Josh Christopher. And we'll see what he's able to do with the Memphis Grizzlies. But as you can see, the Rockets have completely remade their team in one off season. It'll be a totally different team. It'll be a totally different locker room when I go in and talk to the players in the locker room. So that's going to be something that's going to be definitely interesting to see, especially with training camp, which I plan on being out at. It ought to be a very interesting training camp. All right, so I want to move on to the pros and the cons of this Rockets complete rebuild of their team. So let's start with the pros. The Rockets were lacking leadership for the last 3 years. Whether you want to say it's from Steven Silas, whether you want to say from the players on the court, they didn't have the leadership that they needed. And when you're a team, even with Ime, who's going to be the leader now as far as head coach, you need a leader on the court. And it's something that we talked with Vivek Jacob a lot on our podcast yesterday, was that Fred VanVleet brings that leadership not only in the locker room but on the court. He's basically another coach on the court, somebody that players can look up to. He's a former champion. He's done everything. Nothing was handed to him. He had to fight for every single thing he's got in the NBA, and that's something that every single player should be aspiring to, because he was not handed anything. He didn't come out as a number one pick. He was undrafted, and he fought his way up to being an all-star now, max level player. So players have to respect him. And something else Vivek talked about yesterday was that he will hold players accountable. He will get on players. He will not let you slack off in any way. So it may be some hurt feelings next year. You may see some yelling going on in the court. So just keep that in mind. That's something the Rockets absolutely needed. And I know it's something that you can't always tell in numbers, but he brings the leadership that the Rockets absolutely need. And he'll probably end up being the Rockets leader going forward on and off the court. Another thing that Fred VanVleet brings, that's something I don't think a lot of people realize, is Fred VanVleet is, even though he struggled a little bit last year on the defensive end, it also has something to do with injuries. It has something to do with the way Nick Nurse was running the team. He basically ran the team into the ground. He did not have confidence in his bench, so he ran a lot of players into the ground. And I think that was kind of what also affected Fred VanVleet's shooting. But a couple of years ago, Fred VanVleet was actually one vote away from being on the all defensive team. And you wouldn't even think about that with Fred VanVleet being at 6 feet, well, generously at 6 feet, and one of the smaller guards in the league. He is absolutely still one of the better defenders in the league, especially one of the better defenders against Steph Curry that you will see out of anybody in the league, which is kind of funny. Two of the guys the Rockets have are now two of the better defenders on Curry in the league, and Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet. And Fred VanVleet, go look at the numbers. Over the last few years, he has been one of the better at the top of the league when it comes to steals every single year. He was near the top of the league last year in deflections. Every year he's near the top of the league in deflections. So that's something you don't think about with Fred VanVleet. A lot of people are just talking about his shooting, but he is one of the better defenders in the league at the point guard position. Now, I think you will see that next year, and that will make a huge difference for the Rockets. And that's a bonus that I don't think a lot of people thought about. Another pro with this transformation is bringing in Dillon Brooks. Yes, his shooting is a problem I'm going to talk about in the cons. But when you're talking about his defense, he is still one of the better defensive wings in the league. You need a player that you can play defend multiple positions. That's what you're going to get from Dylan Brooks. He's going to be able to guard point guards, shooting guards, small forwards, some maybe even some power forwards, depending on teams go small. So he's able to guard 1 through 4, and he's a player that you can just stick on the other team's best player, and not have to worry about it. He's not a guy that's going to necessarily need a bunch of shots. He's not a high usage player on the offensive end. He's really there for you on defense and to bring toughness. As much whether you love him or hate him, I mean, it's a lot of antics, and that's another thing I'm gonna bring up in the cons. But love him or hate him, he's going to bring that intensity, something you used to see from players like Patrick Beverly when they were here for the Rockets, that he's going to be the type of player that, hey, you love him when he's on your team, but when he's not on your team, you cannot stand him. You despise him. But now that he's on the Rockets, I think a lot of Rockets fans are going to grow to love his intensity and what he brings as far as toughness, because the Rockets have not been a tough team for a while now. Teams seem to be able to come in and push the Rockets around, and a lot of times the Rockets didn't push back. I don't think that's going to be the case at all with Fred VanVleet, who I didn't even mention his toughness. He's one of the toughest players in the league. He only plays one way. That's 100 miles per hour, and that's the same thing you're going to get with Dylan Brooks going forward. So that's absolutely a positive, something the Rockets needed. They needed a defensive stopper at the wing position, because we see the league has become increasingly a wing dominant league, and you need to be able to have a defender like a Dylan Brooks to be able to stop other players, other teams' best players. So that's something the Rockets defense will improve, because we've saw over the last few years, the Rockets have been one of the worst teams in points allowed per game, worst teams in defensive rating, worst teams in fast break points allowed. And I think now that you have these veterans on the team, the one thing you can say about the transformation is, and that's another thing I'm putting in the pros, is that the Rockets won't continue to beat themselves. They have been one of the worst teams in the league also in turnovers the last few years, and that's something I don't think you will see right now. The Rockets will be a smarter team, not to say that the players were dumb, but I mean smarter in terms of NBA knowledge. They won't be going out there beating themselves every night. The other team will have to come beat them, because when you have this many veterans now and all these players they brought in are vets, they will not beat themselves. And that's definitely something that's going to be in the pro column. You're going to see a lot smarter basketball on the court. You won't see players throwing up their hands because another player was in the wrong position on defense, or another player wasn't running back hard on a fast break to help fill the lanes. You won't see that now as much as you saw that the last few years with all the young players the Rockets have. So those are definitely pros, something that you can't quantify from just looking at numbers. You have to look at the big picture when it comes to Rockets. One more pro I want to bring up, something that a lot of people may not be thinking about, is when you bring in veteran players, other players respect, like a Fred VanVleet, like a Jeff Green, like the players that they brought in. It makes it a lot easier when you're going into free agency in the next year or two, because you're more now teams actually respect you. Other players actually respect you. Agents, players talk to each other all the time. So if you're a team that continuously is losing every year, it is hard to bring in good players. Good players are not going to become player on your team unless you severely overpaid them. And this is the problem with teams tanking / rebuilding. When you're tanking / rebuilding, this is exactly what happens. You get a reputation, and you're going to have to severely overpay, and that's exactly what the Rockets will have to do. But now you see that the Rockets are bringing in more veteran type of players. It's going to be a lot easier if another player becomes available. They'll be able to trade for them, or free agency, even though I know right now the Rockets don't have a lot of money on the cap if they have any at all. But it's just as far as the reputation of the Rockets will completely change in the next couple of years, because now the Rockets won't be the laughingstock of the NBA. All right, talk about a couple of cons before we wrap up this video. There are some cons. It's not all sunshines and roses and puppies. It's not that. There are some cons. The Rockets were the worst shooting team, like I mentioned, or near the bottom the last few seasons. That hasn't really improved, at least from what we saw last year from the players that they brought in. None of the players that they brought in last year had a good shooting season. You can go all the way from Fred VanVleet down to Jeff Green. So none of the guys they brought in is really going to, unless they have bounce back season, which is possible, because like I mentioned before, Fred VanVleet coming into last year was a much better three-point shooter. Last 2 seasons, Dylan Brooks hasn't been a good three-point shooter, but before he was an average three-point shooter, a little bit above average, around 34, 35%. But the last year, Dylan Brooks, Fred VanVleet, they're two main guys that they brought in. Neither one of them had a good 3-point shooting season. Fred VanVleet, just overall from the field, shot under 40%. And Dylan Brooks shot 32%, which was actually an improvement over his 30% from the year before. So they didn't really do anything to address their shooting problems. So that's something that they're going to have to organically build from within their own team, hopefully from the players that they had last year, like a Jalen Green, like a Jabari Smith. Maybe Tari Eason continues to show that he can actually be a good 3-point shooter. Maybe Alperen Sengun improves his 3-point shooting, because the Rockets were not a good 3-point shooting team, and nothing they really did in free agency really helped that, at least from what I saw initially. Another con is that they didn't really bring in rim protection. That was another thing that the Rockets sorely needed, something that they talked about during the press conference, having a kind of a different take on the center position outside of Alperen Sengun. They brought in Jock Landale. We'll see what he exactly brings, but he's not necessarily a shot blocker, rim protector. They were trying against Brook Lopez, but he decided to go back. Actually, more money than most people thought, to the Milwaukee Bucks. So they didn't really address another issue, because teams consistently went to the basket against the Rockets. They had zero fear of anybody really blocking their shots. Alperen Sengun at time actually surprised a lot of people. He had some really good blocks last year, but he's not really known as a rim protector. KJ Martin probably was their best shot blocker, which is kind of funny considering that he's a small forward, but now that he's not with the Rockets anymore, you don't have that. Jabari Smith showed that he can block shots in summer league, but he really didn't show that a lot during the season. Maybe he improves on that, but right now, at least from the people they brought in, also Jeff Green is more of a power forward, small ball center. He's not going to really give you any shot blocking. So at least from what they brought in right now, that's still going to be a weakness, even with this complete transformation of the team, is their shot blocking. So that's something I have to figure out and maybe cover up with playing just better overall team defense. So we're going to have to see how the Rockets, how that all plays out in the day. Another kind of course, like I mentioned before, was some of the contract links. Maybe we get more clarification on the Fred VanVleet deal. Maybe it's going to be a 3-year deal, but a 3rd-year team option. Maybe we'll see that Dylan Brooks deal is front loaded. So by the time the time that his contract comes up, maybe it'll be more of a $16-17 million deal at the 3 or 4 year mark, but we have to see how it works out. So those two deals, we have to see how those work out. But for right now, the lengths of those deals are a little bit longer than I think most Rockets fans would like. But again, when you're a bad team, you have to pay the bad team tax. That's just the way it goes. So those are the pros and cons that I see right now. Of course, we have to see how it all plays out. One more thing I do want to mention that I didn't mention before, like I said, that has been as bad as the Rockets have been, you do have the higher draft picks, but you also have to win. And Rafael Stone, I don't know report. I don't have any inside sources. It's not anything that I know. But Rafael Stone, this is Rafael Stone's team now. There's no way you can put it on the coach, because Ime has a long-term contract. Not that coaches can't be fired on a contract, but right now the heat is on Rafael Stone. So if this team doesn't work out at the end of the day, a lot of that's going to fall on Rafael Stone, and that seat may get hot. Not that it's hot right now, because like I said, I don't have any inside sources. I don't know anything that I've heard, but Rafael Stone, this is now his team. He put this team together. So at the end of the day, he's either gonna rise or fall with the team that they put on the court next year. So we will see how it all plays out. And the way I look at it right now, I'm thinking in the range of 30 to 35 wins would be respectable for this team. And if everything goes right, maybe they can get closer to 40. But that's if everything goes right. And again, I don't want to go too overboard one way or another, because we haven't even seen them on the court yet. So we don't know how any of this is going to work out. So all this is speculation right now. So just keep that in mind. Again, we appreciate everybody who supports this channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, because that definitely helps us in the long run, because we want to continue to bring you good content, different content outside of podcasts. We want to bring you breakdown videos. We want to bring you maybe some retro Rocket stuff where we talk about Rockets players from the past that a lot of people may not even know about, because, hey, People need to know about Allen Level. People need to know about World B. Free playing for the Rockets. There's a lot of Rockets players that people don't know anything about. Purvis Short. There's a lot of Rockets that people don't know about that I definitely like to talk about on this channel. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and make sure you check out the next episode of Rocket Report and Rocket Fuel Podcast.